For centuries, humans have been growing alongside our botanical brethren. Our histories have mixed and mingled to bring us modern medical marvels, faded folklore, and everything in between. Of course, in order to understand the plant, we have to start with its roots. I'm M. Grubner Gaddis, and this is Rooted. Hello, and welcome back to another week of Rooted. This week, we're kicking off spooky season with a new miniseries that I've decided we're calling the Monster Mash because I have no shame. We'll be covering all kinds of plants that are either linked to monsters or monsters themselves. If you like this miniseries and you want to keep the Halloween vibes going, be sure to check out our series from last year where we covered all of the plant-based potion ingredients from Macbeth. Anyway, now that you know what we'll be up to, let's dig into the real reason you came today: Venus flytraps. Imagine, if you will, a small but mighty plant with dark green leaves, a mouth filled with a million spikes, and a bright red center, ready to swallow anything whole that lands on it. And that's the subject of today's episode. Venus flytraps, or Dionaea muscipula, are members of the Dronaceae family, with relatives like sundews, water wheels, and most other carnivorous plants. And much like their carnivorous cousins, these guys thrive in humid environments with plenty of bugs. Now, I know what you're thinking. Snacking on insects is cool and all, but why are these things called Venus flytraps? And well, the answer to that is a little weirder than you might think. To really get into it, you need to know that the common name for these guys is technically Tippity Twitchit, which is believed to be a combination of tippet, which was a long clothy doodad thing that hung down from the shoulders and then kind of ended between the legs but above the knees in 14th century England, and then witchit, which is like a super archaic term for vagina. And once that got out, people started calling them Venus flytraps because Venus is largely associated with vaginas, and well, they trap flies. There is also some speculation that maybe it was partially because of some men's potential fear of toothed vaginas, but honestly that was bringing back way too many teeth flashbacks for me, and I just didn't feel like getting into all of that today, so you're welcome. Alternatively to the toothed vagina theory, botanist John Ellis, who is credited with quote-unquote discovering the plant by means of writing a fancy plant journal about it, said this was actually just because it's the name that the Cherokee people had given it. Venus flytraps are happiest in bog conditions, being native to a very thin band in North and South Carolina, which was wild to learn because I always assumed that they had to be from a super temperate rainforest or something. Because this area gets a lot of sun, and not a ton of soil nutrients and all of that sand, these guys had to evolve to get their food by other means. So, they did what any of us would do. They developed little snatcherinis to snap up bugs and other juicy bits so they wouldn't be stuck struggling to outcompete their neighbors. What's interesting about Venus flytraps is that despite so many of us being obsessed with them, we actually know very little about them. Because they're sensitive and very decomposable, we don't have a good idea of how they actually evolved. But, based on scientists' best guesses, we think it went a little something like this. First, the plants figured out it was way easier to eat bugs because they kept just landing on them anyway. And at first they were eating really big bugs, but it was kind of rough because they could just wriggle free. So then they decided they needed to be able to wrap them better, which is kind of how we got Stardews, they think. But then they realized that lots of bugs could still get out of that, so they got a little faster and added a little snapping action. However, that snapping took way more energy, so they had to develop these little hairs to determine if it was worth the snap. And they finally figured out that just being sticky was okay, but being able to just snap shut and digest the bug right then and there was the best way for them to use their energy wisely, thus bringing us the Venus flytrap. Now that we're up to speed on how they evolved, let's talk a little more about how they work. As far as we can tell, these guys use tiny hairs called trichomes, which act like super sensitive triggers, sending the message to the two lobes that they need to snap shut. However, it's worth noting that they don't just snap closed the second something touches their hairs. After a lot of studying, scientists concluded that the hairs actually need to be touched 2 or more times. And in the study, they actually found that plants in higher traffic areas reacted less to stimuli than their rural counterparts. Meaning not only can these plants count, but they also remember and store that counting data, really bringing a whole new meaning to Count Dracula. Shout out to Kat, our editor, for bringing that to my attention and sending me some great articles. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, if you need any editing, she really is the best. Getting back to plants, once the Venus flytrap has determined that something's worth the catch, it snaps its prey in its leafy jaws, with its tiny hairs locking together to keep the unfortunate bug trapped in as it's slowly digested in a bath of stomach acid for the next 5 to 7 days. This acid is actually made up of a variety of enzymes, including phosphatase, pronatase, nuclease, amylase, and a few others, which help to break down those tough exoskeletons and then get to work dissolving the insides. It can take about 3 to 4 days to really start getting into a high enough concentration of digestive secretions, but after that, it kind of just becomes like a good soup in there. And once everything is gooified, the plant sets to work absorbing the nutrients, and then eventually it will reopen its tiny leaf mouth to start the process all over again. As a fun fact, you can tell how hungry these guys are based on how bright the red patch inside of their mouth is. The brighter the red, the hungrier the mouth. And while these leaves take about 5 to 7 days to work their magic, they only live for about 3 to 4 months, but less than that if they aren't very productive, meaning that they aren't catching many flies, or they keep getting triggered without enough energy payoff. If a trap closes more than twice having caught nothing, it's highly likely that it will die off, which is why it's important to not tap the traps all willy-nilly, as it takes a huge amount of energy for them to catch prey, and if they don't replenish it, it can easily kill the entire plant. This should serve as my apology to all the Venus flytraps that children absolutely mangled while I was working in a nursery. Rest in peace, Venus flytraps. We hardly knew ye. On the opposite side of the spectrum, Venus flytraps do have a few recorded uses in indigenous and modern medicine. Most notably, they were used as a cough suppressant, but it's also currently being studied as a potential cancer treatment. Before we dig into that, this is your semi-regular reminder that I'm not a healthcare provider, pharmacist, or in any way qualified to tell you anything about your body and your health. This particular research is still pretty new, and there's a lot we don't know. So take all that I'm about to say with a grain of salt, and don't start buying random supplements on the internet without doing your own research into the product, active ingredient percentages, and manufacturer. Now that my Type 5 on supplement safety is over, the current research on Venus flytraps suggests that they might help to fight and prevent cancer by being chemopreventative, meaning that they help to keep cells from morphing and becoming cancer in the first place by keeping the whole system running smoothly and removing any potential troublemakers as quickly as possible. The main active chemical being studied is known as plumbagin, which is found in a wide variety of lichens, walnut trees, and plenty of other plants. In the Venus flytrap, it's there to help fend off anyone who thinks it would be a tasty treat, or any germs that might want to infect them. In people, however, plumbagins help with the cell cycling process, acting as sort of an assistant to the janitor crew that keeps our dying cells moving along to make room for new ones. Venus flytraps also contain a variety of phenolic acids that function in similar ways, and have proven to be particularly helpful in the fight against pancreatic cancer. Outside of those two things, some supplements contain what is referred to as carnivora, which, from what I can tell, is just a basic extraction of Venus flytrap. It is often sold as a cancer preventative and aid, but one study found it to do more harm than good, especially in regards to the function of the kidney and liver in a patient fighting Hodgkin's lymphoma, where the excess of carnivora actually led to acute intestinal nephritis, which is basically when the tubes of the kidneys get angry and inflamed, and then eventually stop working. Kind of the opposite of what anyone wants their supplements to do. Anyway, outside of this case study, there really isn't any other research into carnivora from what I could find, so I would say to stick to better studied remedies, unless you're specifically trained in part of a tradition where this practice is common. On maybe less of a bummer note, we couldn't kick off our Monster Mash episode without at least pointing out that these guys are not only technically vampires, but also very much the inspiration behind the carnivorous plants that can carry a tune, Audrey 2 in Little Shop of Horrors. And sure, maybe that plant was an alien, and maybe it kind of looks more like a pitcher plant than a Venus flytrap. But you know what? With the bright red mouth and ability to trap and swallow prey while also pulling minimal nutrients from the soil, I'm making the case for it to be included. And this is my podcast, so I get to decide. This isn't a democracy, okay? And if that wasn't enough for you, the Venus flytrap has also inspired creatures across pop culture. Some of the highlights include Venus McFlytrap from Monster High, which her name is, hilarious to me. I just can't imagine the creative team sitting there, really racking their brains, and they're like, her name's definitely gotta be Venus. But what's her last name gonna be? And how are we gonna make sure they know she's a Venus flytrap? And they really said McFlytrap. I will never be over it. And then there's also Venus the Flytrap from the only video game that I really understand, Little Big Planet. There's also the guys from Mario and about a billion other monsters. Interestingly, Charles Darwin was lightly obsessed with Venus flytraps, and so his son grew up even more invested somehow, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle... Hold on. Pause for research. I said Arthur Conan Doyle, hated Harry Houdini, but I'm worried that's not him, so give me 1 second. Okay, we're back from our break, and it turns out there was even more drama than that. They used to be friends, and then basically Harry Houdini was like, I think you're losing your mind, Arthur. And he was like, you're being a fucking bitch, and I can talk to whoever I want from the dead. And then they weren't friends anymore. But anyway, I think I'm going to spread some misinformation in saying that I want to believe that Venus flytraps is what brought them together. And Arthur Conan Doyle also thought they were related to the Yatavio tree in Africa. So this is a very interesting early fandom gathering, to say the least. And while it's unlikely you'd stumble upon one of these in the wild, unless you're from the Carolinas, in which case, what's it like to be God's favorite? I hope that next time you see one, you say hello without touching them, and think a little bit about how weird they really are. That's all I've got for this week, but I'll be back soon to keep this Monster Mash going. See you then! Until next time, be kind to yourselves, be kind to the earth, and just like a plant, drink your water. If you liked the show, please subscribe and consider leaving us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram at rooted.pod. We're finally updating regularly on YouTube at rooted.podcast, and you can check out our website, rootedpod.com, for transcripts, updates, merch, and so much more. The show is written, produced, and hosted by me. I'm Grebner Gaddis, edited by Kat Friend of Friend Diagram, and our theme music was written and produced by Eric Cluxon. Rooted is a Henbane Media LLC production.